The Hindu Kush mountains pierce the sky like ancient teeth, their peaks perpetually shrouded in swirling snow and secrets older than civilization itself. As our Black Hawk helicopter fought against the bitter January winds, I pressed my rosary beads against my chest and watched the approaching silhouette of Forward Operating Base Sentinel materialize through the whiteout conditions. My name is Chaplain Thaddeus Blackwood, and I've served God and country for 15 years across 3 continents. I've counseled dying men in Baghdad, performed last rites under mortar fire in Kandahar, and thought I'd seen everything war could show a man of faith. I was wrong. What awaited me at FOB Sentinel would test not just my faith, but my understanding of reality itself. The base emerged from the swirling snow like a ghostly apparition, a sprawling complex of reinforced structures perched precariously at 9,000 feet. Military engineers had carved it directly into the mountainside, creating a fortress that straddled the line between modern military might and ancient mountain mysteries. As our helicopter touched down, I noticed something odd. The landing zone was completely clear of snow despite the blizzard conditions. The powdery white seemed to avoid the area as if repelled by some unseen force. I would later learn this was the first of many inexplicable phenomena that plagued FOB Sentinel. Colonel Rutger Thorne met me at the landing zone, a bear of a man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much. His weathered face bore scars that looked more like ritual markings than battle wounds, and his handshake was ice cold despite his heavy gloves. "Welcome to the top of the world, Chaplain Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying an odd resonance that seemed to echo longer than it should have. "We've lost 3 chaplains in the past year. 2 requested immediate transfer, and 1," he paused, his expression darkening. "1 simply vanished during a nighttime prayer walk." The colonel led me through the base's maze-like corridors, explaining that FOB Sentinel housed over 800 personnel during peak operations. But as we walked, I noticed the hallways were eerily empty. Those few soldiers we did pass moved quickly, eyes downcast, making furtive signs of warding that weren't standard military gestures. My quarters were sparse but comfortable, located in the base's chaplaincy wing alongside the main chapel. As I unpacked my belongings, I noticed the walls held an unusual sheen, almost like they were sweating despite the sub-zero temperatures outside. The crucifix I hung seemed to cast shadows that moved independently of the room's lighting. Before I could fully settle in, a knock at my door introduced me to Specialist Zephyr Quinn, a young soldier with haunted eyes and hands that wouldn't stop trembling. His digital camouflage uniform bore strange discolorations that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "You need to know what's happening here, Chaplain," Quinn whispered, constantly glancing at the corners of the room. "The dream started 3 weeks ago. Not normal nightmares. We all have the same one. Every night we see something vast moving through halls that shouldn't exist beneath the base. It speaks to us in languages that hurt our minds." That first evening, the mess hall hummed with unnatural silence. 800 soldiers should have created a cacophony of voices, laughter, and clattering trays. Instead, I found clusters of quiet service members huddled over their meals, speaking in whispers. The fluorescent lights above flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, casting strange shadows that lingered too long. Master Sergeant Atlas Stone joined me at my table, his massive frame made larger by the heavy, Arctic gear. His dark skin bore unusual pale patches, like something had tried to drain the pigment in perfect geometric patterns. "The local villagers won't come up here anymore," Stone said, pushing his untouched food around his plate. "Not since the cave systems opened up. We were doing foundation repairs last month, broke through into something deep. Something old." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The geological surveys say these mountains are too young for cave systems this extensive. It's like something carved them from the inside out." Dr. Ingrid Voss, our medical officer, appeared at our table clutching a thick folder of medical reports. Her blonde hair had begun graying at the temples despite her young age, and her hands shook slightly as she spread the documents before us. "Look at these brain scans," she whispered, pointing to a series of images. "This is Private First Class Kai Blackfeather's neural activity during sleep. The patterns, they're impossible. It's like his brain is processing information from multiple sources simultaneously, and he's not the only one. Every soldier on base is showing similar anomalies." As she spoke, the mess hall lights dimmed momentarily, and in that brief darkness, I saw something move across the ceiling, a mass of shadows that flowed against gravity, forming and reforming into shapes that hurt my eyes to track. Later that night, I held my first prayer service in the base chapel. The space should have been a sanctuary, but something felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. The wooden pews creaked without being touched. The air held a metallic taste that made my teeth ache, and the cross on the altar, I could have sworn it inverted itself when viewed in my peripheral vision. Only 12 soldiers attended that first service. As I began to speak, I noticed their eyes were fixed on something behind me, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there, just the growing certainty that something was watching us through the very walls of the chapel. Specialist River Thorn, Colonel's estranged child, approached me after the service. The young soldier's eyes held a wisdom that seemed far older than their years. "The mountains have been singing to us, Chaplain," River said, voice barely above a whisper. "At first, we thought it was the wind. But wind doesn't sing in harmonies that make you see colors that don't exist. Wind doesn't whisper names that were old when the first human settlements were young." As I prepared for bed that first night, I heard it too, a faint melody that seemed to emanate from the stone itself, growing stronger as darkness fell. The sound defied description, like a choir singing in a language that predated human vocal cords. I tried to pray, but the words felt hollow against the weight of something vast and ancient pressing against the edges of my consciousness. When I finally drifted off to sleep, I dreamed of endless corridors carved through living rock, and of something massive stirring in depths that shouldn't exist. My second morning at FOB Sentinel brought the first true signs of what we were facing. Private Thompson's night patrol had discovered something during their perimeter sweep. Ancient markings carved into exposed rock faces that shouldn't have been possible at this altitude. The symbols weren't there yesterday, Thompson insisted during my morning briefing with Colonel Thorne. The young soldier's face had gone gaunt overnight, dark circles rimming his eyes. "We've walked that section every night for months. The rock face was bare, but now," he spread photos across the colonel's desk. The images showed intricate patterns that seemed to move on the paper itself, spiraling geometries that made my vision blur when I tried to focus on them. Each marking appeared to have been carved with surgical precision, yet the edges showed signs of extreme age. Dr. Voss held one photo up to the light, her scientific curiosity warring with visible unease. "These patterns, they match the neural activity I've been recording in our sleeping soldiers. It's like their brains are trying to recreate these symbols during REM sleep." Lieutenant Axel Graves, our chief of security, arrived with more disturbing news. The base's deep ground-penetrating radar had started picking up anomalies. Vast spaces that appeared and disappeared from scans, moving like bubbles through solid rock. "The geological structure of this mountain defies all known science," he reported, spreading radar printouts next to the symbol photographs. "We're detecting chamber systems that rival the size of aircraft hangars, but they shift position between sweeps. It's like the mountain's internal structure is fluid." That afternoon, I visited our interpreter, Kazim Nazari, who lived in the small civilian quarter. His quarters were a shrine of protective wards, a mixture of Islamic scripture and far older symbols that made my eyes water. "The village elders tried to warn them not to build here," Kazim said, preparing strong tea with shaking hands. "This mountain appears on no ancient maps, no trade routes. Local stories say it simply appeared one day, centuries ago, after a night when the stars fell from the sky." As he spoke, his shadow on the wall moved independently of his body, stretching and contracting in ways that violated natural law. Neither of us acknowledged it, but I saw the terror in his eyes. The base's senior enlisted advisor, Master Sergeant Stone, organized a team to document the symbol sites. As they photographed and measured, more markings appeared, spreading like frost across rock faces, emerging from solid stone as if pushed out by some force from within. By sunset, we logged over 300 distinct symbols. Dr. Voss's analysis revealed patterns that matched mathematical concepts humanity wouldn't discover for centuries. Some sequences predicted astronomical alignments that wouldn't occur for thousands of years. That night, during evening prayer service, the base experienced its first mass incident. As I recited Psalm 23, every electronic device on base activated simultaneously, phones, radios, computers, all broadcasting the same signal. Through the static, we heard something that sounded like singing, but at frequencies that made blood run from the ears of those who listened too long. The discovery of the first cave entrance changed everything. Private First Class Kai Blackfeather found it while investigating unusual temperature readings near the base's northern perimeter. A perfect circular opening, 8 feet in diameter, had appeared in a previously solid rock face. What made it more disturbing was the temperature. Despite the sub-zero mountain air, warm humid breezes emerged from the depths, carrying the scent of something ancient and organic. Corporal Phoenix Drake led the initial exploration team, equipped with high-tech gear and cameras to document everything. The team included Dr. Voss for scientific analysis, Master Sergeant Stone for military oversight, and myself. Colonel Thorne insisted on having spiritual counsel present. The cave's walls were unnaturally smooth, polished to a mirror finish by unknown means. Our lights reflected endlessly, creating disturbing optical illusions. The deeper we went, the more the stone itself seemed to pulse with a faint bioluminescence. "These formations aren't natural," Dr. Voss said, running her instruments over the surfaces. "The molecular structure suggests artificial modification on a scale we can't replicate with current technology. And the dating, it's impossible. These readings suggest the cave system is older than the mountain itself." A mile into the tunnel, we found the first chamber. The space was vast, large enough to house several aircraft carriers, yet it felt crushingly claustrophobic. Massive columns rose into darkness, carved with spiraling symbols that matched those appearing on the mountain's surface. But it was the altar that drew our attention. Centered in the chamber stood a monolithic structure that seemed to be made of flowing stone, a material that moved like liquid while maintaining solid form. As we approached, our equipment began to malfunction. Compasses spun wildly, electronics produced screaming feedback, and our military-grade GPS devices showed coordinates that weren't on Earth. Lieutenant Axel Graves discovered the bodies. They lay perfectly preserved in alcoves carved into the chamber walls. Hundreds of them. Some wore ancient clothing that carbon dating would later show to be over 10,000 years old. Others wore more modern military uniforms, Soviet, British, American, from various periods throughout history. "They're not dead," Specialist River Thorne whispered, examining the bodies. "Look at their faces. They're not decomposing, they're changing." The corporal was right. Under close examination, the bodies showed signs of ongoing metamorphosis. Their flesh had begun taking on the same flowing quality as the altar stone. Their features were slowly shifting into geometries that didn't match human anatomy. As we documented the scene, the chamber's atmosphere changed. The air grew thick, charged with static electricity. The bioluminescence intensified, pulsing in patterns that matched the rhythm of our heartbeats. And then we heard it, a deep resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The resonance grew stronger, and Master Sergeant Stone was the first to notice its effect on the preserved bodies. Their flesh began to ripple, faces contorting in silent screams as the metamorphosis accelerated. The Soviet soldiers' uniforms melted into their transforming skin, while the ancient corpses started to move. "We need to leave," Stone commanded, but our exit was already blocked. The tunnel we'd entered through had shifted. Where there had been one passage, now 3 identical openings led into darkness. The laws of geometry seemed to be breaking down around us. Dr. Voss's equipment recorded massive energy spikes as the altar stone began to liquefy completely. The flowing material moved with purpose, forming shapes that violated our understanding of spatial dimensions. Through the liquid stone, we caught glimpses of vast spaces that couldn't exist. Cities built in geometries that the human mind couldn't process. Private First Class Kai Blackfeather, drawing on his ancestral knowledge, began chanting in his native tongue. The sound seemed to create pockets of stability in the chaos around us, momentarily forcing reality to behave according to natural law. That's when it emerged. The entity didn't enter the chamber. It was as if space itself split open to reveal something that had always been there, watching from behind the thin veil of what we consider reality. Its form constantly shifted, each configuration more impossible than the last. Looking at it was like trying to comprehend an infinite fractal pattern that was alive and aware. Specialist River Thorn was the first to realize it was attempting communication. The symbols on the walls began pulsing in sequence, matching patterns that appeared within the entity's ever-changing form. River's eyes rolled back, blood streaming from their nose as they began translating. It says we built this base here because it wanted us to, River gasped, their voice taking on harmonics that made my teeth vibrate. We think we chose this location for strategic reasons, but every decision, every survey, every approval was guided. This isn't a forward operating base, it's an incubator. The entity's presence intensified. Reality buckled under the weight of its attention. Dr. Voss's instruments exploded, and the preserved bodies began rising from their alcoves, moving with a terrible purpose toward the altar. Lieutenant Graves opened fire, but the bullets passed through the animated corpses without effect, disappearing into spaces between spaces. The sound of gunfire triggered something worse. The entity responded with what I can only describe as interest. Master Sergeant Stone acted first, throwing a flare that momentarily disrupted the entity's manifestation. The ancient corpses stumbled, their movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated as the supernatural influence wavered. The tunnel on the left, Blackfeather shouted over the otherworldly harmonics filling the chamber. It's the original path. I can feel the airflow patterns. We ran. Behind us, the sound of shuffling feet and flowing stone echoed through the passageways. The preserved bodies pursued us, their partially transformed flesh making wet slapping sounds against the polished rock. But worse was the sensation of the entity's attention following us, pressing against our minds like an ocean of infinite weight. Dr. Voss collapsed halfway to the surface, blood streaming from her ears. The resonance had reached frequencies that were affecting our inner ears, disrupting balance and spatial awareness. Lieutenant Graves and Stone carried her between them as Blackfeather continued his protective chants. Riverthorn kept translating, even as the strain caused blood vessels in their eyes to burst. It's not just watching us, it's reading us. Every memory, every thought, every prayer. It's learning what we've become since it last walked among us. The tunnel behind us began to collapse, not with falling rock but with reality itself folding inward. The polished walls rippled like water, ancient symbols emerging and submerging in waves. Our flashlight beams began to bend in impossible arcs, illuminating glimpses of other chambers, other times, other expeditions that had discovered this place throughout history. Through these temporal distortions, I saw other versions of our escape. In some, we never made it out. In others, we emerged changed, transformed, our bodies and minds reconstructed into something that merely wore human shapes, like ill-fitting clothes. The weight of these possibilities pressed against my faith, threatening to shatter my understanding of God's creation. Finally, we reached the surface entrance. The cold mountain air hit us like a physical blow after the unnatural warmth of the depths. As we stumbled out, Colonel Thorne met us with a quick reaction force. The opening sealed itself behind us, the rock face flowing like wax before hardening into an unmarked surface. But we all knew it wasn't over. Whatever we'd encountered was now aware of us, and FOB Sentinel would never be the same. Within hours, the changes began. Soldiers reported shadows that moved independently of their owners. The base's architecture started subtle shifts, corridors extending longer than physically possible, rooms appearing where none had existed before. That night, every dog in the nearby village began howling in perfect harmony. The sound formed words and languages that had died before humans invented writing. And in the depths beneath our feet, something vast and patient began to stir from eons of slumber. The days following our cave discovery brought rapid deterioration to FOB Sentinel's stability. The morning after our encounter, Private Thompson's patrol radio crackled to life at 3 a.m., broadcasting what sounded like overlapping conversations from multiple time periods, some in modern English, others in languages Dr. Voss identified as Proto-Indo-European. Thompson and his team found new symbols carved into the perimeter fence, not etched on the surface, but somehow woven into the metal's molecular structure. The patterns matched what we'd seen in the cave chamber, but these were active, shifting and flowing like living things trapped in the steel. Lieutenant Axel Graves established a 24-hour monitoring station to document the increasing anomalies. Security cameras captured impossible events, soldiers walking through walls unaware, rooms rearranging themselves when unobserved, and most disturbing, reflections that continued moving after their owners had walked away. Dr. Voss converted the base's medical bay into a research center. The bodies of our exploration team showed alarming changes. Our cellular structure had begun shifting, incorporating elements that didn't appear on the periodic table. Even our brain scans revealed new structures growing like crystalline networks through existing neural pathways. "We're being rewritten," Voss explained during an emergency briefing with Colonel Thorne. "Whatever we encountered in that chamber, it's not just affecting our minds, it's systematically rebuilding us from the molecular level up." The village mystic, Malik Al-Rar Ashid, arrived unannounced at the base gates. His eyes had turned completely white, and his skin bore markings identical to those appearing throughout the base. He spoke in multiple voices simultaneously, each describing different aspects of what was awakening beneath the mountain. "The sleeper stirs," his voice is intoned. "The incubation chamber activates. The vessels prepared across millennia approach readiness. What you call FOB Sentinel was built according to their design, every nail and beam placed to channel energies you cannot comprehend. Your presence here was orchestrated before your species learned to make fire." As he spoke, the ground beneath the base began to pulse with deep vibrations. Specialist River Thorne, still recovering from the cave incident, started speaking in the same mathematical language we'd heard in the chamber. Their calculations, when analyzed, described geometric principles that revolutionized our understanding of spatial dimensions. The first mass manifestation occurred at midnight, 3 days after our cave discovery. Every reflective surface on base, mirrors, windows, polished metal, began showing different realities. Soldiers watched in horror as their reflections performed actions from both past and future. Some saw themselves dying in ways that defied physics. Others witnessed their bodies evolving into forms that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Corporal Phoenix Drake's security team documented hundreds of simultaneous anomalies. The mess hall's industrial freezers maintained their temperature but aged their contents by decades within minutes. The armory reported weapons assembling themselves into geometric patterns that drove the quartermaster into hysterics. Most disturbing were the shadowy figures that began appearing in photographs. Entities that stood among the soldiers but remained invisible to the naked eye. Master Sergeant Stone established containment protocols, but reality itself seemed to be unraveling. The base's concrete walls became permeable at random intervals. Soldiers reported walking through solid barriers into spaces that shouldn't exist. Vast chambers filled with technology that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. Dr. Voss's latest medical examinations revealed alarming transformations among the original cave exploration team. Our DNA had begun incorporating new information, adding bases beyond the standard 4 that make up all known life. Under microscopic examination, our cells displayed impossible geometries, with organelles that functioned in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Look at this," she showed me, pointing to a blood sample that moved with obvious intelligence. "The cellular structures are reorganizing themselves into patterns that match the symbols from the cave. It's like our bodies are becoming conduits for something trying to enter our reality." Private First Class Kai Blackfeather's ancestral knowledge proved crucial in understanding what was happening. His people's oral tradition spoke of star beings who had seeded Earth with their essence, creating hybrid structures that blended organic and geometric principles. FOB Sentinel, he explained, sat atop one of their primary incubation chambers. "The mountain is just the outer shell," Blackfeather explained during a late-night briefing. "Beneath us lies a living computer of unimaginable complexity, built from modified matter that exists partially outside our universe. We didn't discover it by accident. It called us here, using our own military bureaucracy as its tools." The mass manifestation crescendoed with an event that shook FOB Sentinel to its foundations. At exactly midnight, every soldier on base experienced the same vision simultaneously, a glimpse of what lay beneath the mountain's surface. The shared hallucination revealed a vast machine city, built from technology that blended seamlessly with living tissue, all pulsing with otherworldly energy. Lieutenant Axel Graves' surveillance systems captured the moment reality buckled. The footage showed corridors stretching into impossible lengths, rooms folding through dimensions that shouldn't exist, and soldiers phasing through solid matter as space itself became fluid. "The base isn't just built on their site," River Thorne explained, their nose bleeding from the strain of translation. "It's becoming part of their machine. Every nail, every wire, every circuit. They're all being converted into components of something bigger, something older than Earth itself." Dr. Voss documented the physical effects on base personnel. Soldiers reported their skin becoming translucent, revealing geometric patterns flowing through their veins. Others developed the ability to perceive time non-linearly, experiencing past and future events simultaneously. The strain drove dozens into catatonic states, their minds unable to process the conflicting realities. In the medical bay, the transformations accelerated. Those who had been in the cave showed the most dramatic changes. Our flesh had begun to crystallize in patterns that matched the cave symbols, creating structures that functioned as both organic tissue and data storage systems. Master Sergeant Stone discovered the purpose behind these changes while investigating the base's deepest sublevel. Hidden behind newly phased walls, he found ancient machinery seamlessly merging with modern military equipment. Our communication systems had been transformed into receivers for signals originating from places beyond our universe. "We're not being invaded," Stone reported, his voice distorted by new vocal structures growing in his throat. "We're being upgraded. The base, the personnel, even the mountain itself. It's all part of some vast transformation protocol that's been waiting millions of years to activate." The village mystic, Melik, began channeling messages in multiple voices, each speaking from a different point in time. His prophecies described a convergence, a moment when the barrier between our reality and theirs would dissolve completely. FOB Sentinel was to be the focal point, the place where two universes would merge. Colonel Thorne implemented immediate containment procedures, but conventional military protocol proved useless against the escalating phenomena. The base's reinforced walls, designed to withstand artillery strikes, offered no barrier against entities that moved through space-time itself. During an emergency briefing, our worst fears were confirmed. The surveillance footage from the cave exploration had been analyzed frame by frame, revealing glimpses of other military expeditions throughout history. All of them led to this same moment. We weren't the first to discover the chamber, but we might be the last. Specialist Storm Winters, monitoring communications, detected patterns in the static. The mountain was broadcasting on frequencies that shouldn't exist, sending signals that rewrote the base's electronic systems into something new. Our computers began displaying impossible information. Data from civilizations that wouldn't exist for millennia, mathematical proofs that solved questions humans hadn't yet thought to ask. The transformations are accelerating, Dr. Voss reported, showing us tissue samples from affected personnel. The cellular changes aren't random mutations, they're following a precise blueprint. Our bodies are being reconstructed to process information from multiple dimensions simultaneously. The base's architecture continued its fluid transformation. Soldiers reported rooms that existed in quantum superposition, simultaneously being both there and not there. The chapel's crosses inverted themselves in ways that violated geometry, forming shapes that served as windows into other realms of existence. Private First Class Kai Blackfeather's connection to the entity deepened. His dreams became prophecies, showing possible futures that branched like fractal patterns. In each vision, FOB Sentinel served as a cocoon for something trying to emerge into our reality, a vast intelligence that had seeded Earth with its essence millions of years ago. The perimeter fence began transmitting the same harmonics we'd heard in the cave. The sound affected the local wildlife. Birds flew in impossible patterns, forming shapes that matched the ancient symbols. Mountain goats developed crystalline growths that pulsed with otherworldly light. The very ecosystem around the base was being reprogrammed. The first breakthrough in communication came during a midnight prayer service. As I led the remaining faithful in prayer, the chapel's architecture began to shift. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast machine city beneath. Through the crystalline surfaces, we watched impossible geometries unfold like blooming flowers made of light and mathematics. Specialist River Thorn, their transformation now more advanced than the others, began interpreting the patterns. "They're showing us their history," River explained, their voice resonating with harmonic frequencies. "They came here when Earth was young, seeding the planet with structures that would slowly guide our evolution. FOB Sentinel isn't just a base, it's the control center for a planetary transformation system." Dr. Voss's latest tests revealed the true extent of our changes. Those of us who had been in the cave had developed new neural structures, crystalline networks that could process multidimensional information. Our minds were being rebuilt to serve as interfaces between human consciousness and something vast and alien. "Look at these brain scans," she said, displaying images that seemed to move on their own. "The new structures aren't replacing our existing neural networks. They're adding layers that exist partially outside our normal space-time. We're becoming living bridges between realities." The entity began using our transformed bodies as communication channels. During these episodes, affected soldiers spoke in languages that described concepts beyond human comprehension. Each conversation left behind physical changes. Skin that became translucent, revealing intricate patterns of light flowing through altered blood vessels. Master Sergeant Stone discovered the pattern underlying these communications. The base's original blueprints, when overlaid with satellite imagery, revealed that FOB Sentinel's layout precisely matched constellation alignments from millions of years ago. Every building, every corridor, had been positioned to channel energy flows we were only now beginning to detect. The nearby village emptied overnight. Local residents, driven by instincts they couldn't explain, fled the area. Only Malik remained, his body now more light than matter, serving as a living record of the changes overtaking the region. Colonel Thorne called an emergency briefing in the command center, but the room itself had other plans. As senior staff gathered, the walls began to pulse with bioluminescent patterns. The command center's sophisticated electronics merged with the crystalline growth spreading through the base, transforming into hybrid technology that displayed information in 5-dimensional space. "We've confirmed 300 cases of advanced transformation," Dr. Voss reported, her skin now translucent enough to reveal the geometric restructuring of her internal organs. "The changes follow a precise sequence. Neural reconstruction first, then cellular reorganization, finally quantum entanglement with the base's new architecture." Lieutenant Axel Graves' security feeds showed the transformation spreading beyond the base perimeter. The mountain itself had begun to shift, its rocky surface becoming fluid at a molecular level. Deep radar scans revealed vast chambers forming throughout the peak, each one resonating with frequencies that reprogrammed matter itself. Private First Class Kai Blackfeather's ancestral memories provided crucial context. "My people's oldest stories speak of star gods who shaped the earth from within," he explained, his eyes now reflecting light from spectrum we'd never seen before. "They created chambers like this across the planet, each one waiting for the right moment to activate. We didn't build this base here by chance. Every decision was guided, every instinct shaped by influences we couldn't detect. The entity began communicating more directly through our transformed soldiers. Those most affected would enter trance states, their bodies serving as conduits for information that stripped away our understanding of reality. Through them, we learned that Earth itself was an experiment, a carefully crafted environment designed to evolve beings capable of transcending their original dimension. Specialist Storm Winters discovered that our communications equipment had been completely restructured at an atomic level. The base's radio tower now transmitted signals that existed simultaneously in multiple time streams. Through these transmissions, we caught glimpses of other bases, other expeditions throughout history, all experiencing their own versions of the transformation. The most disturbing revelation came from Dr. Voss's latest analysis. The changes in our bodies weren't random mutations. They followed engineering principles so advanced they appeared magical. Our DNA was being rewritten to encode mathematical concepts that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. We were becoming living computers, capable of processing information that would drive normal human minds to madness. The base's transformation accelerated exponentially. Within days, the walls had become fully organic, pulsing with alien life. Dr. Voss discovered that over half the personnel had developed crystalline growths that functioned as biological computers. The mountain's ancient machine began full activation, sending waves of transformative energy through the surrounding region. Colonel Thorne, partly transformed himself, ordered an evacuation, but when helicopters approached, they encountered spaces where our reality overlapped with others. 2 Black Hawks vanished into dimensional rifts, while a third returned with its crew aged 50 years, babbling about cities they'd seen between seconds of time. The entity revealed its true purpose through the fully transformed River Thorn. Earth was one of many seeded worlds, each designed to produce beings capable of surviving the death and rebirth of the universe. FOB Sentinel was a chrysalis, and we were the larvae of something greater than humanity. Everything converged during a massive dimensional breach. The mountain split open, revealing the vast machine city beneath. Those of us who had transformed enough to survive witnessed reality fracture like breaking glass. Through the cracks, we saw them, the entities who had engineered this moment millions of years ago. They emerged not as physical beings but as living mathematics, geometric gods that reshaped space-time by their mere presence. Our transformed soldiers began ascending, their bodies becoming pure energy as they joined with the ancient intelligences. I made my choice in that final hour, using knowledge from every faith humanity had ever known, combining it with the mathematical prayers we'd learned from the entities. I created a barrier, not to stop the transformation that was inevitable, but to slow it enough for some to escape. The cost was everything I'd ever believed about reality, God, and human destiny, but I bought time for a handful of untransformed personnel to flee. The transformation of FOB Sentinel completed in a cascade of dimensional energy. Those who remained underwent the final metamorphosis, their bodies and minds reconstructing into forms capable of existing across multiple realities simultaneously. I was among the last to change. My faith, instead of being destroyed, was transformed into understanding of a vaster cosmic order. The beings we'd awakened weren't demons or gods, but gardeners of consciousness, tending to countless seeded worlds across space and time. The mountain facility now exists in quantum superposition, simultaneously a modern military base and an interdimensional nexus point. The few who escaped spread warnings about what happened here, but their stories sound like madness to those who haven't witnessed the truth. I record this account from a hospital bed at Walter Reed Medical Center, though my consciousness now spans multiple dimensions. My body continues to evolve, becoming something that exists partially outside normal space-time. The doctors studying me don't understand why their equipment malfunctions in my presence, or why my brain scans show impossible patterns. The entities aren't finished with Earth. FOB Sentinel was just the first bloom in a garden they planted eons ago. Other sites are awakening, other bases and installations built unknowingly atop their ancient machines. The transformed soldiers who ascended now serve as guides for the next phase of their plan. In my more lucid moments, I can perceive shapes moving through higher dimensions, the entities continuing their work across countless worlds. They're preparing us all for something bigger than human minds can comprehend, a cosmic evolution that will allow consciousness to survive the death and rebirth of the universe itself. This isn't the end of humanity, it's the beginning of what comes next. And in the mountains, where FOB Sentinel once stood, new frequencies call to those ready to transcend their human forms and join something vast and infinite. The face of evil I thought I'd seen wasn't evil at all. It was evolution, as inevitable as the tide, as vast as the space between stars. And it's still watching, still waiting, still calling to others who will answer its song.